It shouldn't be shocking, but one of the most productive college quarterbacks of all time unsurprisingly had a very impressive statistical year. We can have another incredibly productive, efficient quarterback who, if someone were to just look at the stats, would probably think they could end up being a first rounder. But if you've seen rankings or mock drafts recently, Gabriel's nowhere to be seen that high. So let's take a look to see why that's the case. Hey y'all! For this week's video, we'll be doing an in-depth analysis of Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel. If you're new to these, my evals use a lot of different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out my eval on Cam Ward, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details than that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the quarterbacks from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, and Kyle McCord, which you can check out on my channel as well. Also be trying to cover a quarterback nearly every week leading up to the 2025 NFL Draft, so if you don't want to miss any of the other quarterback evals, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Gabriel. Also before we get started, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I'm a contributor for DLF or DynastyLeagueFootball.com, and while this of course won't affect my channel or content here, if you haven't used DLF or want to try to use their premium service, new users can use my discount code BACKSEAT99 in all caps to sign up for DLF Premium for just 99 cents for the first month. That will give you access to all the articles, rankings, tools, and more. Now I've also mentioned this before, but I always want to make sure I do repeat this just to make it clear. That makes DLF Premium 99 cents for the first month. If you don't like it, you can cancel it within that first month and not be charged more than 99 cents. But if you do forget to cancel it after the first month, or you just want to continue having it and using it, it'll be $12.99 every month after the first month. It shouldn't be shocking, but one of the most productive college quarterbacks of all time unsurprisingly had a very impressive statistical year. Gabriel ended up completing 72.9% of his passes for 3,857 yards and 30 touchdowns, while also rushing for 149 yards and 7 touchdowns on 75 carries. He did unfortunately have a fair number of turnovers with 6 interceptions and 3 fumbles, but generally he does a decent job protecting the ball. For the games I chose this chart, I of course chose both of his Ohio State games, his Penn State game, and then chose his Michigan game. Looking at his raw statistics, they are all pretty impressive, completing nearly 65% of his passes nearly all of his games, and throwing for nearly 300 yards in each game and not having a single interception. The other thing that might be noticeable is the few number of scrambles he had. For those unaware, college includes sacks in rushing attempts and yards, so if we take out his 19 sacks from the season, he only rushed for a combined 56 times in his 14 games. Now Gabriel does have good movement ability, which he showed at Oklahoma, but that just wasn't used as much due to Oregon's scheme. So that could be something he taps into more in the NFL. But even without the rushing as often as he did in the previous seasons, he was still very impressive as a pocket passer. We can have another incredibly productive, efficient quarterback who, if someone were to just look at the stats, would probably think they could end up being a first rounder. But if you've seen rankings or mock drafts recently, Gabriel's nowhere to be seen that high. So let's take a look to see why that's the case. Starting with his footwork, there are a lot of areas he'll need to continue to work on, but he has some really good footwork on the move and does a good job getting his chest and feet square with his target. Outside of that though, it's pretty rough for someone with as much experience as he has. His base is still way too narrow far too often, and there are a number of times when he just loses his feet and balance when making his throws. This is especially worse against pressure where his base and fundamentals often collapse. For his drop back, there's a lot of good leg crossing and there are a lot of heel clicks in the drop back, and even in the pocket when he's on the move. There's also a number of times when he didn't have good hip twists syncing up with his throw, affecting how much he could truly drive the ball. He also would make things worse by being too toesy in the pocket and further decreasing his drive. So with a lot of improvements still needed in his footwork despite the amount of experience that he has, Gabriel earned just a D+ for his footwork. For his pocket presence, despite having scrambling ability, Gabriel shows really good fundamentals in the pocket. He can remain calm and make subtle movements to extend his protection. Also, he's never afraid to step up in the pocket and does a great job keeping his eyes downfield to look for a big play rather than just settling for a few yards on a scramble. Despite searching for opportunities, Gabriel also generally knows when to give up on a play and isn't afraid to throw it away and live another down. That being said, for as much as he can step up in the pocket, he can also sometimes get himself stuck trailing back in the pocket or lead himself into a sack. When he is trailing back, he can also have a tendency to throw off his back foot, which makes throws even more difficult than they have to be. He also will sometimes be a bit delayed in recognizing pressures closing in, and he just lacks the speed or burst to escape those defenders when they get too close. That lack of great speed and burst is honestly going to be one of the things that will make it harder for him to secure a role in the NFL. At his size, quarterbacks like Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray not only have to use their speed to escape incoming pressure to help them keep plays alive, but they can also use that movement skills to help find passing windows, which is a necessity at their size. For most of the year, Gabriel did a good job finding passing windows, but that got significantly worse at Penn State and in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State and in his previous seasons at Oklahoma as well. So even though there's still definitely a lot of areas he can still improve in, Gabriel had a lot more good than bad in the pocket and ended up earning a B for his pocket presence. For his arm strength and release, despite being a shorter quarterback, Gabriel actually has pretty respectable arm strength. It certainly isn't great and it is a step down from some of the other quarterbacks in this class, but he can still manage to put some respectable velocity on throws. He also has a great understanding of proper release points, which helps him put some really nice touch on throws and makes him one of the better touch throwers in the class. Also, while his release still needs to be cleaned up, he does have solid speed and he is capable of throwing at diverse arm angles, which is desperately needed at his size. Now to clarify on his release though needing to be cleaned up, I think this is where I kind of deviate from consensus as I have serious concerns about his release. There is so much dip to his throwing motion and a looping motion to his throw in general. Also, he has a tendency to pat the ball before releasing it, which can key in the defense and even further prolong his release. Between the big looping motion, the pat, and not having the arm strength to make it a very quick motion, that just leaves a lot of opportunity for pass rushers to get their hands on the ball. Also, to circle back to his arm strength, he often needs to generate great velocity or be able to drive it downfield by throwing his whole body into throws. Thanks to the number of starts he's had, he can sometimes get away with that. However, that generally led to worse accuracy downfield, as we'll see in his deep ball accuracy numbers later on. Also, when he needs to generate more velocity, he can also tend to pull the ball back a bit too far, further extending an already prolonged release motion. So with his limitation of his arm strength and needing to resort to using his whole body to drive the ball, he ended up earning just a C+ for his arm strength. For his release, the prolonged motion dropped the grade pretty far, but the release still being relatively quick and him being able to throw out diverse angles and having good understanding of release points to put some nice touch on the ball kept his grade above the water at a B-. Going to his playmaking, ball security, and top star potential, this whole section is going to be a very mixed bag and might be a bit back and forth, so I'm going to try to keep it on one path to try to keep it as coherent as I can. So as I mentioned before, Gabriel is one of the most productive college quarterbacks of all time, so there's definitely some playmaking potential there. As we'll see in his charting, his accuracy helped a lot, but he also has some solid but not great speed, as I mentioned before, that adds versatility. Also, as I mentioned previously, he does a good job not settling for short scrambles and keeps his eyes downfield for bigger opportunities. In general, he does a great job seeking out those opportunities and is one of the most underrated processors in the class, and one of the best at diagnosing openings against zone and his mismatches against man coverage. While a number of college quarterbacks rely on their coaches from the sidelines to help them find an opening, Gabriel does a great job at pre-snap recognition of what the defense is going to be giving him and how to beat it. Also, while he can have some lapses, he generally can protect the ball pretty reliably. So if we're talking about a highly productive quarterback with good mobility, accuracy, pocket presence, and processing, what is there not to like? Well, starting with the thing he can't control and could take him off some teams' draft boards altogether is his size. At just 5'11", if we round up from his 5'10.5" report at the Senior Bowl, he's well on the short end of NFL starting quarterbacks. There are obviously exceptions to that rule with Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray recently, but as I mentioned before, those quarterbacks either have much stronger arms and or have better mobility to help them make them more viable starters. The closest quarterback in terms of quarterbacks at his size that have worked in the NFL is Bryce Young, which to be honest, the jury is still out on whether he can be a long-term starter in the NFL or not. So history isn't on his side, and his size does pop up on film, which doesn't help his case either. With a fair number of deflected passes and needing to squeeze every ounce of strength on a lot of deep balls, there are just a lot of things out of his control that will likely hold him back in the NFL. Add in all the other deficits that also need to be worked on, and it just gets hard to buy in on him being an NFL starting quarterback. Now, don't get me wrong, he has the makings of a good backup quarterback in the NFL, but teams may not be looking to have such an undersized backup, as that sometimes requires a different game plan that the coaches don't want to also add into the mix, so that he needs to worry about playing his backup quarterback as well. Also, Oregon's scheme does need to be discussed. Despite being a good processor, 67% of his passes traveled less than 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. Now, Bo Nix was essentially at that same rate last year, and it proved that this shows that Oregon quarterbacks aren't incapable of reading NFL defenses. However, it will be something teams will need to look into further. As for what he's shown as a processor, as I mentioned, he can jump between progressions, but I would really like to see him make that next step and start to manipulate defenders with his eyes. Also, while Nix most often targeted players in the short area due to the scheme, there were a number of times when Gabriel was too complacent with targeting underneath players, even on 3rd and long situations. That popped up a lot in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State, even when the team was trailing by several possessions. So I just want to see him go back to his Oklahoma self when he was confident getting the ball downfield and can prove that he can get the ball downfield confidently and accurately again. So despite the high level of production he put up, Gabriel earned just a C+ for his playmaking due to his arm strength holding him back and not having elite mobility of some of the other smaller quarterbacks. For his ball security, Gabriel had an interception or fumble on 9 of his 522 combined pass and rush attempts, which equals out to an interception or fumble on every 58 pass or rush attempt, which ends up scoring at B- for my scale. That sounds kind of low, but it's just kind of how the grading breaks down since he just barely missed out on being at a B. For his top star potential, due to his limitations and questionable fit in the NFL, he ended up earning just a C+. Honestly, that might be a little bit generous since that's higher than some of the other quarterbacks with higher ceilings than him, but he does have a good foundation to at least work as a quality backup if a team does want to give him a chance. Plus, for transparency, I do have a soft spot for scrambling quarterbacks with good accuracy, so they tend to often score higher in my grading than other quarterbacks since I just think they have more versatility in the NFL and can usually work for more teams. Speaking of that accuracy though, let's take a look at his charting results. If you're a visual follower, there's likely a lot more red than you probably expect from Gabriel here. Before going into any of the percentages and scores, I do have to give an immediate reminder that Gabriel is a left-handed quarterback, so some of the percentages along the boundaries may not be a perfect 1-to-1 for him, since the sample is primarily made up of right-handed quarterbacks. I would like to have a separate data set of just left-handed quarterbacks for left-handed throwers, but with the data just being from last year and that sample being so small, it's just not reliable to only make that criteria. So we'll have to make do with what we have. So anyways, to get back to the charting results, starting at the bottom, Gabriel had a poor 63.89% in the short left, but a good 91.67% in the short middle and 84.62% in the short right. Gabriel was less impressive in the medium areas at just 68.18% in the medium middle and 72.73% in the right. But that right score is the biggest example where we need to remember he's a lefty, since if it was flipped to the left side of the field and was done by a right-handed quarterback, it would have actually been in the green or at the 70 percentile. We can see the effect of him being a lefty and his medium left being at 92.86%. Moving to his intermediate areas, he was greater along the boundaries at 75% in the left and 100% in the right. That being said, the middle was rough again at just 50%. The deep areas were also a bit of a mixed bag at 0% in the deep left and middle, and a great 75% in the deep right. So we had a few areas that weren't great, but I think the most concerning thing to me and a glaring weakness of his is his ability to win in the middle. That's an area that he will absolutely need to win at in the NFL, so it's really disappointing to see him struggle there. Now, I do want to point out that Bo Nix also struggled in the middle last year, and he's been just fine in the NFL, so it's not a deal breaker, but just something to monitor with his size. But either way, similar to Will Howard from Ohio State, this is just another case where accuracy doesn't always mean clean passing chart across the whole field. Moving to Gabriel's off-platform passing, this is where we kind of start to see his limitations in his arm strength really start to show. We can see almost a cluster of green or good areas in the left and middle, with a score of 76.92% in the short left, 87.5% in the short middle, 83.33% in the medium left, and 100% in the medium middle. But then a near full red perimeter outside that cube with a 62.5% score in the short right, 50% in the medium and intermediate right, 25% in the intermediate middle, and then an okay 57.14% in the intermediate left. However, that intermediate left does need to be taken with a grain of salt, since if we did the same thinking we did as the medium right in the previous on-platforming area, where we need to almost flip the scores in the field thresholds, that 57.14% would actually be below the 50th percentile. So despite having really good footwork and fundamentals on the move, this really highlights some of his arm strength limitations as he isn't able to drive it accurately to the opposite side of the field or deep down the field while on the move. Now, not to pummel on the guy, but I do want to do an in-depth breakdown of his Rose Bowl game against Ohio State, since I think it was kind of his only poor game of the whole season. If you're able to see the graphic, there's just as much red as green and a lot of the same good areas and rough areas being consistent from his full breakdown on platform. Starting at the bottom, Gabriel had a poor 62.5% in the short left, but a good 87.5% in the short middle and 93.75% in the short right. He also had a good 87.5% in the medium left, but a poor 50% in the middle and 66.67% in the right, which even if we consider flipping the field and the thresholds, that 66.67% in the medium right is still pretty poor. He didn't have a lot of attempts in the intermediate or deep areas, but did have a 100% score in the intermediate left and middle, albeit on 2 total throws between the areas, and a 0% score in the deep left and middle, which again was just off of 2 passes in those areas combined as well. So as I mentioned before, Gabriel really struggled getting the ball downfield against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and was primarily willing to settle on short passes despite the team needing to push the ball downfield more, which is concerning. What was also concerning was the high number of sacks he took in this game and also the near interceptions he had as well. Gabriel had 8 sacks this game, which make up nearly half of the season's total. Now, a fair number came at the end of the game, so you could use the argument that he was overextending to try to make a play, but a lot were also just from bad reads and bad decisions by him. Speaking of bad decisions, I also had Gabriel charted for 4 dropped interceptions this game, which almost made this game even more of a disaster of a game for the Oregon team. Had the defense actually converted on those plays, Ohio State could have even been more ruthless and hung probably 70 on them. To add even more salt to the wound, Gabriel also had 4 passes deflected in this game at the line of scrimmage, making things even more frustrating for him in the offense. So this was basically a nightmare scenario of a game for Oregon, which you can tell from the charting, and Oregon may have lost anyways, but the combination of Oregon and Gabriel both having their worst game of the season, and Ohio State having the best defensive performance of the season for them, made this a total beatdown. To look at his off-platform charting against Ohio State real quick, not a lot you can take away with a lot of the same good and bad areas, with 75% in the medium left and 100% in the medium middle, but just poor scores of 50% in the short and medium right, and an okay 50% in the intermediate left. So if we want to look at it this way, at the very least his chart numbers being nearly 1-to-1 from his total sample at least shows he is consistent. So as it probably doesn't come as a surprise, Gabriel had great accuracy around the boundaries at 68.18% on the left side of the field and 78% on the right side of the field. Unfortunately, as is obvious from his charting, he was poor in the middle of the field at just 69.35%. Which again, isn't a deal breaker, but something he will need to prove he can do in the NFL. Despite his poor performance in the middle of the field, his boundary success was good enough with enough volume to be able to lead him to a 72.06% total accuracy score, which easily puts him at least at the 70th percentile. Despite his footwork issues, his veteran experience seemed to pay off with not too many way off throws, with just 9 total when on platform and 2 while off platform. As I mentioned, he took 8 sacks in the Rose Bowl game against Ohio State, so I made up the majority of those 10 sacks that he took in the sampled games. So if you want to put a more positive spin on it, he only took 2 in the other 3 games. He also had just a single fumble in the sampled games, which is good to see as well. He also did have the majority of his season's deflected passes at the line of scrimmage, with 9 in the games I charted, and for reference had 2 pass interference calls. As I mentioned, he also does a good job taking throwaways with 7 total, which doesn't sound like a lot, but outside the Ohio State game, he didn't really need to resort to a throwaway too often since he had time in the pocket, so that at least is a pretty good measure of how often he's willing to do that. Now he did throw 0 interceptions in the games I charted, but as I mentioned before, he should have had 4 in the Ohio State game alone, and also had 5 total dropped interceptions between the sample games. So even though he just barely missed a mark of getting a B for his ball security, I do think his final score of a B- is more fitting for him based off what I saw. Also for reference, he had 6 drops by his pass catchers. Despite his mobility, he only had 8 designed quarterbacks runs and scrambles. As I mentioned before, I would like to see him use his legs more, and I think it will be a necessity if he wants to get a chance in the NFL. Finally, Oregon's scheme definitely helped him with this, but Gabriel was great against blitzes with a 57.89% success rate. Similar to Will Howard though, teams knew it was a poor plan to blitz him regularly and try to get more pressure from 3 or 4 man rushes, which Gabriel was still solid against with a 54.95% success rate, but it wasn't quite as impressive as his peers from last year. So by taking all of his totals, Gabriel ended up earning a B+ in his short throw accuracy, A- in his medium throw accuracy, B+ for his intermediate throw, and just a C- for his deep throw accuracy. For his throws on the run, he was fantastic in the areas he was able to target and earned an A, but this is another case where we may need to have an asterisk with the difficulties to get the ball deep downfield and to the opposite side of the field. Against pressure and blitzes, Gabriel is very good at beating both and ended up earning a B. For a summary of Dillon Gabriel's strengths, his experience shows on nearly every play, and that should be an asset for him in the NFL. Even though college defenses are more vanilla than NFL defenses, having the number of reps that he's had and seeing the different number of defenses and defensive sets that he's faced will help him get a jump start in training camp. His processing will also help with that, as he's one of the most underrated processors in the class. That processing ability shows in his success rates to consistently beat pressure and blitzes and make defenses pay for sending extra defenders. Also, when he's buying time against pressure and blitzes, he shows good pocket discipline and typically does a good job staying strong in the pocket to find the best possible option. Finally, his ball placement is still really impressive from an accuracy standpoint, and also still from a standpoint of giving a pass catcher a good chance to pick up yards after the catch. Now, while his production and strengths may suggest Dillon Gabriel is an NFL starting quarterback, I still have major concerns about that assumption. Gabriel's lack of great arm strength, smaller size, and lack of elite speed will likely cap his upside and make it hard for NFL teams to consider drafting him. Also, his footwork is extremely messy despite his experience and will absolutely need to be an area he focuses on for the NFL. He'll also need to find a way to clean up his release. The big looping motion is something that he can get away with in college, but with quicker defenders and less space in the NFL, teams will absolutely take advantage of that extra time and make him pay. I'd also like to see Gabriel make defensive pay more by taking more shots downfield as well. I know Oregon's scheme played a role in this, but the times he was willing to settle underneath when the team needed more yards was really disappointing this year. Speaking of more yards, Gabriel will have to find a way to maximize his deep ball, as ball placement can be a bit erratic down the field and too unreliable, which will further limit him. So by taking the average of all his scores, Dillon Gabriel ended up scoring at a 2.74 out of 4, which has him at my may have a future role tier and just barely missing out on the next tier above. Honestly, I think this is a very fitting place for Gabriel to grade out at, since there's a lot of things he does well from his accuracy, pocket management skills, and processing. The problem is there's also a lot of buts in his profile. He's accurate, but he struggles in the middle of the field and deep down the field. He has good pocket management skills, but he lacks great rushing ability. He's a good processor, but he also doesn't have the arm strength to follow through on what he sees. So I definitely can understand people being higher on him, and honestly I think in the grand scheme of things I'll likely end up being higher on him than most, but I do also want to have realistic expectations of what he can be with how limited he is and likely being limited to a backup quarterback in the NFL. Due to both being quality backup options, I have Colt McCoy as Gabriel's comp. Both have shorter builds, but both have thicker builds which help them have good but not great arm strength. Also, both are very accurate in the short, medium, intermediate areas and have great processing ability to attack all areas of the field. Both also have a little bit of movement ability to help bail from the pocket and have good pocket awareness as well. Both are also very productive collegiate athletes, but maybe less productive in the NFL due to their limitations. Also, both unfortunately have a bit of a windup to their release and can have their footwork crumble when under pressure. Both can also hit the underneath areas as I mentioned before, but have variable results when targeting deep down the field. Similar to McCoy, I see Gabriel as a reliable option if the starter ever does go down. Great arm talent and/or great mobility are the missing pieces for Gabriel to have the makings of a true NFL starter at his size. Unfortunately, those are things he can't control and can't really do anything about to get. So it's important for him to continue to do well in the areas he can control to try to secure a backup role in the NFL. And that's all for Dillon Gabriel. Let me know what your thoughts are on the eval and on Gabriel, since I think he's being overlooked after the bad performance against Ohio State. I'll be working to have a quarterback eval most of the weeks leading up to the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack, as I'll have the full written eval for each player out at the same time as the video. But thank you all, and see you all next time.